Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
On this week's episode of Where We Are, Italy elected Giorgia Meloni as its next prime minister, and this has resulted in a renewed conversation about nationalism, identity, the right wing in politics in the West, and how Christians ought to relate to it. And we're going to talk about those issues on this week's episode. You're listening to Where We Are.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up.
You're listening to Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
It's good to be back with you for a new episode of Where We Are, hosted by the That Sounds Fun Network, of course. Melissa, we just returned. The kids are in bed after really a special day for you, special day for the family. It started at Target, and I think the report out that I've received from you so far is that was magical.
Because you never go to Target with me.
So having the whole family out at Target, what I got out of the deal was a little apple crisp macchiato situation. So it's officially fall. Pumpkin spice. No, I don't do pumpkin spice. We both do not like
pumpkin spice. Ugh.
For me, it's the apple season. We're going apple picking next weekend. That's going to be fun. But then, and this is going to be surprising for some of y'all, it's going to be a shock. I have an explanation. We went to Olive Garden.
Yes.
And we
Michael, in the middle of Target, looks over at me and he goes, "You know what we should do for dinner tonight? We should go to Olive Garden." And he was so conspiratorial about it.
Yeah, no, so here's the thing. If you look at it from one direction, Michael talks about being Italian all the time. He makes his own pasta.
He scolds you all if you cook it wrong, and you talk about it on Twitter.
Yeah. He has very definite views on Italian cooking. Then Olive Garden doesn't make any sense. And if that's the only way you're looking at it, I agree with you. It makes no sense. Here's the other way of looking at it, which is Melissa and I are two blue-collar kids for whom, growing up, Olive Garden...
It was a nice dinner.
It was you were celebrating something.
When you were hear your family.
Yeah, and I mean, you all know, it's the breadsticks, it's the salad, it's beautiful. There's something about Olive Garden that transcends space, time, and here's the sticking point: transcends culture. So this is where. So look, enjoy Olive Garden. Feel freedom to go to Olive Garden. We do. No judgment here. And I'm actually quite opposed to the elitism that shames people for going to Olive Garden. Just don't say it's your favorite Italian restaurant. That's the only place I draw the line. I'll even accept the paradoxical, nonsensical Olive Garden is my favorite restaurant, but not my favorite Italian restaurant. Now, right, on a logical level, that makes no sense. If it's your favorite restaurant, it has to be your favorite Italian restaurant. But here's the thing, not really Italian. They had something on the menu when we went there today. It was I think, don't quote me on this, chicken and shrimp carbonara.
Yeah, I don't know what
that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. Don't do that.
If all you have is bacon, that'll be a carbonara. And if you have guanciale, then yes, that is really a carbonara.
Then you're making progress. But chicken and shrimp carbonara, come on now. But look, if you go to Olive Garden and just say, we're going to have a nice meal, we're going to have some salad, some breadsticks, not have the most authentic Italian experience of my life, do it. It's wonderful. Ilaria, 18 months old. Usually, hoovered. Oh my goodness.
She sat at a real chair for the first time, so she just felt like she was the big kid on campus, and then she just hoovered her little shells with meat sauce.
She is usually just the wiggliest worm. You can't get her still. She, we may have talked about this on a previous episode, but she
turns into liquid.
Her bone structure dissolves, and she becomes pure goop as she evades any human containment, except for at Olive Garden, apparently, because the second they put those shells with meat sauce in front of her, folks, she went 25 minutes. The girl did not move except to ask for apple juice, and she completely decimated. And I feel so I took Saoirse to the dentist this morning.
Yeah,
and it's true, we don't give the girls juice at home. We
don't. No.
But I did. It was kind of funny. The dentist was like, mostly water, milk. And I'm like, yeah, we barely give the girls juice. And then I'm looking at them tonight with two, honking things of apple juice. I'm like,
that apple juice,
I hope the dentist doesn't walk by at this point. He'll be like, you liar.
All I can say is that I think Ilaria Chiro, that's her name, Ilaria Chiro, walked into Olive Garden tonight and she was like, this is my place. This is my name. My name is Ilaria Chiro. I have to be this way.
Well, it turns out, to make a transition here, Melissa, that the question of what's authentically Italian is not only controversial when it comes to Olive Garden, but also to Italian politics itself.
Yeah, and leadership.
Let's move into the substance of the episode. Although I think people will get a lot out of the Olive Garden debate. but let's get to the substance. Melissa, could you just update folks on what happened in Italy last week and just a bit of the context around that?
Yes, I will. So last Sunday, Giorgia Meloni, the leader of the Brothers of Italy party, Fratelli d'Italia, her coalition of right-wing parties took 44% of the vote. So Giorgia Meloni is the next prime minister of Italy. She will be the first female prime minister of Italy. And for many, it's a bit confounding because you can read the media, the press, scholarship, Italian press itself, and hear Giorgia herself and her party and this coalition defined in several different ways. In Italy, you'll read that she's center-right or a right-wing leader. In a lot of American or European publications, you'll read that she's a far-right, a neo-fascist leader and part of that kind of party. And so it caught a lot of attention this past week. Obviously, Italy is a very powerful country. It's a powerful member of the EU, but it caught more attention than normal because of a lot of the questions and conversations around nationalism and fascism, especially because Europe has, for the past 40, 50 years been sort of a bastion of this kind of ideology, and these political parties have been percolating for that long. But to see someone actually win the leadership in a very powerful country has set off a little bit of a few alarm bells. Definitely has set off a few alarm bells in the EU because Italy is not just a member of the EU, it's a member of the Eurozone. And
this week, President Biden even expressed concern.
Yeah, President Biden expressed concern. And for me, so that I'm completely clear, I definitely define Giorgia Meloni as a far right-wing leader. The neo-fascist label is super interesting, just to get a little bit into the history before we move on. So Giorgia herself, she got her start, and it's said that she got her her start in politics at the age of 15 when she joined what was called the MSI Party. And the MSI Party came about around 1945, 1946. And it was created by those who were followers or admirers of Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini, you probably recognize that name if you went to grade school in the United States, at least. He was the leader of Italy during World War II. And he is the person who invented the term fascism and led the fascist party of Italy. And so this party, MSI, came about after Mussolini's reign as a sort of a way of just continuing that legacy. And when Giorgia was 15, she joined that party. And she, as that party evolved into various different parties, she continued on in that sort of far-right neo-fascist realm until 2012, when she got the chance to break off from Silvio Berlusconi's party. Berlusconi has been prime minister of Italy 3 times. He was last prime minister in 2008 to 2011. She broke off from his party, created this new Fratelli d'Italia, or the Brothers of Italy, which at that time in 2012 was very much founded on anti-immigrant sentiment, which is a hallmark of a far right-wing party in Europe. Most far right-wing parties in Europe are entirely based, their foundations are based on anti-immigrant sentiment or xenophobia. And then it was also quite ultra-nationalist at its beginning as well. So ultra-nationalist is like the step above nationalism, not just the idea that, the self-interest of your country, that your country should come first. It's like that, but on steroids. And so her party has also been labeled ultra-nationalist. You might hear that term tossed around as well. So I wanted to mention that one just because you might hear it. And so back, in 2012, at the beginnings of this party, it definitely looked more far right than it could possibly look to a lot of people who might not know a lot about Italy, to a lot of Italians themselves inside Italy. Like I said, lots of Italian publications are calling her right-wing or center-right. And that's because she took an interesting pivot, which is, part of our conversation tonight between you and me, Michael, is that she kind of did, Michael, and you and I were discussing this earlier, I call it kind of like the sort of American-esque general election type turn, where, in order to win this prime ministership, she not only just had to show that she was going to be a smart leader, because the other far right-wing coalitions just haven't been able to hold on to power over the last 3 to 4 years because their leaders are just not adept at being leaders. She just had to show that she was a smart leader and then sort of pivot towards much more pragmatic center-right type policies, even though, and again, this is why I consider her far right, I think her ideology is very much still centered in the far right, and I think will be interesting as she actually has to govern and lead over the next, just few months to see if she returns to those roots or not, which do underlie or create the foundation for her politics, and how much she'll still be pulled in that pragmatic direction. I mean, and
what fights does she choose to actually take on? Is she, selective? Does she have in mind sort of a sort of a bearing capacity for how much she could push?
Because, for example, when this party was first formed, she was definitely viewed as a Eurosceptic, which would, sort of anybody who talks about her being neo-fascist or somehow part of fascism, this would, be a point on their side because she was against the euro at first. But now, who wouldn't be pro-euro, though, as a sort of pragmatic leader of Italy when Italy entirely benefits from the monetary policy set by the EU, from this strong currency. If Italy had to switch back to its own currency, it would be nowhere near the strength of the euro or many of the other powers that it's trying to compete, or not compete with, but stand with on the world stage in the G7 and the G8, etc. Yeah. So I mean, this party, she was much more Eurosceptic up until a short while ago. Now, ever since Ukraine happened, she has, said that she supports, Italy sending arms to Ukraine and staying in NATO and being pro-NATO, where before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, she was not speaking positively about NATO. There were questions about, would her party lead Italy to leave NATO and not just the Eurozone? But, she's
and
right
it's
back
like
there.
an international organization. And so, for a nationalist to be like, well, nationalists except for, the EU and sort of the Euro,
That is why
NATO.
She's a chameleon. I am very intrigued by her because she is showing herself to be chameleon already and she's able to pivot this party and this coalition with these two other far right parties in this way where it's confounding. It's confounding for analysts. It's confounding for experts because everybody would love to fit her in the fascist box. But Michael, you and I were talking earlier that, Benito Mussolini and, in most common definitions of fascism were created in the 30s and 40s and not during a time of high anti-immigrant sentiment, whereas all these far-right parties in Europe were mostly created in the 70s as a reaction to all the economic immigration of the golden age, the golden economic age in the 60s. Then in the 70s, the gold standard went away and Europe tanked economically, just like the United States did, faced stagflation, just like the United States did. And a lot of these parties were created to find some kind of scapegoat, and it was immigrants. And so fascism just really isn't usually built on that particular kind of sentiment. It's more built on like sort of the ultra-nationalist, nativist sentiments, which are slightly different. And so that's why when you hear people sort of throwing these terms out, it's good to think through them a little bit. And that's what we wanted to do here with you today.
Yeah, so Melissa, let's pull back. I think part of what is confusing for conservative Christians in particular is they read Meloni being attacked, being criticized as sort of like far right wing, and then like the excerpts of her speeches are like her saying, I'm a Christian, I'm a woman. I'm proud to be Italian, and I think the critics, in some cases, rightly, right? Like Meloni does have a policy agenda. Her party has a history. That sort of rhetoric is weighted with specific policy solutions. But when I think Christians who don't know, when Christians in America are just sort of, they weren't following the Italian election. They just sort of like see this and hear people saying, this fascist leader got elected. Can you believe what she's saying? And then what she's saying is
excerpts are very normal sounding.
People are like, it almost re-emphasizes the very kind of thing that politicians like Meloni pick up on, which is like, I'm saying the things we used to be able to say, and the things that are should be normal things that quote unquote they have taken away from us. And I think there are a lot of people like saying, like what's so wrong with her saying I'm Christian and I'm a woman? And so how does that? You talked about it a bit, but talk about a bit more. What makes Meloni far right wing in your view? Is it that rhetoric, or is it something else?
It's ideology, which
plays out in
policy in the end, which we have not seen her as prime minister yet. So this remains to be seen, which is why I'm saying it'll be so interesting to see just in the next few months, when she's actually in power, in leadership, what she actually does policy-wise to see if she continues down this route of actually moving towards the center, right? Like an actual true move, or if she's a very adept, smart politician who knows that those on the left in Europe or in America, wherever, will take her quotes and juxtapose them against, statements that she's a fascist or that she's far right or ultra nationalist, when she's saying, very sort of more normal mainstream things, very establishment sounding things, when she is anti-establishment.
Because she has been, as you noted before we started recording, she has been saying some of the typical what you'd want to hear an incoming prime minister or president or whatever. She's been saying, I'm going to be a prime minister for all the people. I'm not I'm not here to sort of be an adversary towards specific groups, like that kind of thing. And
yes,
you kind of go, oh, okay, like where is this going? Yeah,
and for the right, you'd hear those, you'd get those quotes and say, everybody on the left is just panicking. This is just the typical panic of the left and just throwing out, accusations that have no merit or no base. And this a similar sort of rewriting of image rhetoric, whatever you want to call it, has been happening with Viktor Orban in Hungary, who is very much an authoritarian leader in Hungary, who has made actual policy moves, not just rhetorical moves that are like anti-free press, anti-free speech, like you name a bunch of different things, to the point where you'll hear me often say that Hungary should no longer be a part of the EU because it's gone down such an authoritarian route as Orban. Orban has, glommed onto the right in specifically the MAGA right in the United States, and has gotten people like Tucker Carlson, so like mouthpieces, to sort of just say, Orban is just saying what we're all thinking, and his policies aren't anywhere near what the left is saying about him. Yeah. He just wants, his country to prosper, and he wants to put Hungary first. Yeah,
so I think there are really two main points I want to make in this episode. And the first is right where you led us, Melissa. And that is sort of a warning both to not just the left, but really anyone from the center right to the left that has concerns about, opposes sort of this right-wing nationalist impulse. And really, I have this similar warning for Christians and others who are just watching this from afar. And that warning is, we make a big mistake when we hear the emotion and the sort of identity naming, the sort of what Meloni names as sort of a personal sentiment or personal passions or sort of personal sort of sense of oneself. We do a real disservice when we conflate that with politics, with what her actual job is, the job of governance. And the same goes for Orban, all this. On the left, and for politicians who are running against people like Meloni, running against people like Donald Trump, they make a big mistake when they hear an emotional appeal, and because they read into it these policy solutions that they disagree with so vehemently, they dismiss it all.
Yep.
Because they're worried that if you grant any sliver of sort of the motivation for the policy, that you legitimize the policy. And what I'd say, particularly after we've seen this game sort of play out over the last 10, 15 years in the US, in Europe, is that actually if you decide to dismiss entirely, not hear, not even respond to, which doesn't mean you don't have to agree with it, you don't have to agree with where the thought goes, but when you decide that you're just not even going to hear or respond directly to those personal senses of motivation that a politician like Meloni and Trump and Orban so effectively tap into, then you actually give voters who hear those sorts of emotions, those sort of identifications, and say, yeah, I kind of see that. You give them with nowhere else to go than with the policy solutions to those problems that the right is offering. Mm-hmm. And sort of the parallel warning or sort of suggestion for Christians and others who are sort of watching these debates from afar is don't follow the sort of cultural appeal, which is really not fundamental to politics as governance. Just because you see merit in the cultural appeal, don't allow that to carry you without thought into supporting the policy solutions of the people who are naming these things. And I feel like we can, this happens all the time across the board in many different ways, but it happens especially here. It's like, oh, Meloni is saying these things. She's the kind of leader we need. And you'll say that based on rhetoric, but not knowing what any of the policies she's proposing might be. And so that's a critical point. I think the other point I want to move to, Melissa, is I think that there can be a bit of a vacuum that is left when the right is able to tap into such deep and profound senses of identity and a sense of sort of fragility and unmooring. Mm-hmm. I think the response of the left is too often, man, get with the times. Like, mm-hmm. This is where history is going. Like, do you want to be left behind? Mm-hmm. And if one side is appealing to a person's sense of identity, of who they are, their sense of self and community, the do you want to be left behind is not really an effective answer to that. Because what you're saying is leave behind yourself, leave behind your sense of identity, leave behind the sources of values that you have because they no longer work. Well, if one alternative is saying I see you for who you are and how you see yourself, and the other side is saying, like, who you are, like, it just isn't working anymore. That's a very that can lose some elections.
And especially for usually a group of people or voters, whatever you want to call them, who are already feeling a deep sense of insecurity, because usually these types of politicians, like a Meloni, like an Orban, like a Trump, are hyper focused on using security terms for basically every area of life, not just actual real wartime, like war or national security. And so you're using that kind of rhetoric on people who already have this really heightened sense of fear, because much of again, I'm going after underlying ideology. Even if some fluffy rhetoric is placed on top, a lot of the underlying ideology is very much fear-based.
Yeah. And you know, I think in Italy this is the case. I think you could make this argument in other contexts. Like, it's important to note, you know, Meloni is coming to power after years of really technocratic rule that I think, you know, analysts would say, you know, some of the leadership of people like Monti
or
Draghi, yes, Draghi especially, like Italy could be so much worse off if they didn't have those hands at the wheel, those economic sort of minds. But for the average Italian, you're going, we've had basically a decade of continuous sort of technocratic, sort of rule and leadership, and we're on the brink of not being able to heat our homes, this
Yes.
winter. So, I also think there was a sense of disruption, not too dissimilar from American voters giving Trump a chance in 2016. Melissa, you said something. We've been talking about this all this week, and this is something we've talked about before, and it was just a really helpful reminder to me. Just to pick up. So if the alternative to offering as an objection to sort of nativist appeals like Meloni's and anti-immigration appeals like Meloni's, especially when it's grounded in a preservation of values. Yes, you could respond to that saying, no, this is the 21st century. If you want to thrive economically, that's going to require sort of a globalization. It's going to require a flat earth. It's going to sort of all this. Another way to approach it is to offer an identity-based and values-resourced positive approach to questions of migration and questions of diversity and questions of living together. You can draw on a whole range of theological resources for this work. In Italy, for instance, the Catholic Church is still quite powerful.
It's very Catholic.
It's a very Catholic country. Well, Catholicism has some resources for this. It was very interesting. The Vatican released a pretty stern statement in response to Meloni's victory, suggesting that it was not going to sort of sit back or hold its tongue on issues that the Vatican and that Catholic social teaching speak to, that Meloni has run afoul of. But I want to talk about this earlier example of what I'm offering as potentially a better way forward of rejecting sort of these anti-immigrant sentiments. And we've talked about Chancellor Merkel. We're fans. We're stans. And in 2010, as migration and multiculturalism were sort of beginning to really press on Merkel politically in a significant way, she went to a gathering of her party and made a provocative argument. Someone who attended the town hall that she was at asked her about particularly Muslim immigrants to the country. And Merkel, who, by the way, is the daughter of a pastor, said something fascinating. She said, she told her party, quote, "We don't have too much Islam. We have too little Christianity. We have too few discussions about the Christian view of mankind." Merkel went on to say that what people viewed as a crisis, what people viewed as a challenge to German identity, what people viewed as a challenge to sort of national values, she viewed it as an opportunity to talk about, quote, "the values that guide us and about our Judeo-Christian tradition. We have to stress this again with confidence." And so, obviously different countries have different sort of contexts, different leaders have different sort of convictions. and I'm not suggesting sort of this as a strategy so much as I'm saying directly to Christians. I've just seen a lot of chatter, and frankly, as you know, Melissa, I get where it's coming from, and it makes a ton of sense. And if one side is saying this is the way to embrace your Christian faith, and the other side is sort of not mentioning that at all, or even suggesting that embracing your Christian faith or acting on Christian values is sort of antithetical to their project, that's going to be a real... It means that you need to resource your own thinking about things as opposed to taking marching orders and sort of being too easily led by cultural appeals of politicians. And instead, you need to be able to say, look, even though Christian appeals are being made to me on this basis, my view of the dignity of the human person lead me in a different direction. And so that's really there is. It is not going to be fruitful to ignore some of the identity and values-based claims of the right, and instead an alternative should be offered, not just on the level of policy, but on the level of how the case is being made. And in lieu of that, Christians still have a responsibility to know their own values, their own convictions, the resources of their own tradition enough to push back even when the sort of political binaries don't map completely on to those identity claims and those emotional appeals and sort of the stated sources of values.
And I just want to reiterate a point that you made a few minutes ago, that this idea that the way to combat or lead people who have been sort of sucked in by the fear-mongering or fear-based politics, the way of leading those people is not to say, oh, you're being left behind, but it's actually the positive vision. And what we mean by positive vision is for showing anyone who is more attracted to this fear-based ideology that the things that they're afraid of can actually cease to be a threat to them, not that they're just not smart and being left behind, that there's no basis for whatever fears that they have. It's showing them that whatever they fear doesn't actually have to threaten them.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that we can make in our politics is to tell people that what they're experiencing, what's playing out in their lives just like doesn't exist or doesn't matter. This is like a trope, but like you need to meet people where they are. You need to be able to try and build some common sense of reality. And then your solutions, your way forward, sort of in the midst of that reality, might be very different than what they are drawn to, what they think they're drawn to. But make your case from there, not telling folks that they're irrational or ignorant for even having the concerns that they have. That's typically not going to be productive in a democratic environment. And so I hope that's helpful for you. There's so much more to discuss on this sort of set of topics, but there's been much discussion over the last week. We just wanted to sort of speak into that know it's been confusing for a lot of folks to see how this conversation has sort of unfolded. And so hopefully we gave you some food for thought. Next week will be less than a month away from midterm elections. And so we'll, I think, increasingly talk about how the midterms are shaking up between now and Election Day. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Where We Are.
Bye.
Don't be so hard to reach. Just pick up your phone. Tell me where you be, 'cause I got